Over time, Britain has been producing relatively fewer manufactured items and more services. Over three-quarters of our output is education, healthcare, banking, shipping, services of various kinds, including haircuts. Does it matter that a once great industrial nation is now producing relatively few manufactured items? Can we really survive on haircuts? All societies have a mix of different kinds of output to satisfy needs. Any society will produce some agricultural goods, some manufactured products, some services, but the proportions of services to manufacturing to agriculture will vary considerably between countries. Now, part of the explanation for that is in the nature of their resources. Some countries are particularly suited to agriculture, they produce a lot of it and then export some of it to pay for manufactured imports. But there's something else that goes on as well. And that is that over time demand tends to change. So you find that countries will often, when they're less developed, produce lots of agricultural products, less manufactured products, and very few services. As they develop, they begin to shrink their agricultural sector, and people move more into the towns, and the manufacturing sector grows. But when we reach a high level of income, it's the demand for services which grows, so manufacturing output begins to fall. A useful way to present this information is via a pie chart. We'll look at three such charts to show the proportions of output represented by agriculture, manufacturing and services in three different economies. The first is the UK. Each slice of the pie represents a sector. Notice how powerfully the diagram represents the relative proportions of output. The UK is an advanced economy. Notice how relatively tiny the agricultural sector is. Now look at China. Notice the pie chart covers the same area as that for the UK. Whatever the size of the economy, each one has an output level of 100%. The Chinese economy has grown very rapidly in recent years, so although agricultural output is huge, it has shrunk relative to its manufacturing sector. Finally, consider Sierra Leone, a relatively less developed economy. The pie chart is the same size as for the UK and China, despite the fact that it's a small economy. The pie chart emphasizes the different proportions of output. Agriculture is easily the biggest sector here. One great example of economic changes over time is Venice. The place used to be dominated by manufacturing and by trade, but now it's dominated by its 50,000 tourists a day who come and spend large sums of money. Now, manufacturing is still of some significance, like here at the famous Murano glass factory, but even that isn't independent of tourism. Lots of tourists come and buy what's produced here. So over time, this is another example of how the proportion of output which is manufacturing can decline and the proportion of output which is services can tend to expand. But what of the UK? Is there anything to worry about with the relative decline of manufacturing here? There's been a lot of concern in recent years over the relative decline in manufacturing output in the UK. Some people say we can't live on haircuts, that in some sense manufacturing output is more important than service output. But is that in fact true? Many economists don't worry about the fact that the UK produces relatively little agriculture. There used to be a group of French economists called the physiocrats who thought that only agriculture was worthwhile. It really adds value. You plant one seed into the ground, you get hundreds. Manufacturing doesn't achieve that.
It just rearranges stuff and adds no value. Now people realise that that's not true. The process of manufacturing adds value. What we now have is people making the same mistake about services as the physiocrats made about agriculture. Only manufacturing is real. No, services are just as real.
The value of a pound's worth of wheat is exactly the same as a pound's worth of car, is exactly the same as a pound's worth of haircuts. £1. Of course, this does make an assumption that the good or service has been bought in the marketplace. That way we know consumers value the output. If it's been provided by the state on a non-market basis, we don't know if people value it at more or less than £1.
The other great concern is, do we produce enough manufactured items to satisfy the needs of the population? Can we really live on services? Well, some parts of the country come close to that. This is the Lake District.
They make very little here. The land isn't very suitable for agriculture. Just a few scrawny sheep. It's very wet. You have to be born waterproof to live here. But it attracts tourists with its stunning scenery. Wordsworth called the Lake District in general and Grasmere in particular as the finest place on earth. So many people here earn their living providing tourist services. They don't make boats. They provide boat rides for the tourists. They don't make cars or refine petrol. They look after tourists' cars. You may feel that it doesn't matter that they make very little, because other parts of the country provide the manufacturing in return for the services produced here. People make things there and exchange their goods for tourist services when they come here on holiday. The exchange process benefits everybody. But does it really make any difference if the exchanges are not all within the country? Britons as a nation make relatively few manufactures because we're good at services. We exchange these services for manufactures, much of which we've imported. This exchange process, our exports of services for their exports of manufactures, benefits everybody, Britons and foreigners alike.
Now, what's true of an area can be true of a whole country. If our resources are best suited to services, we produce the services, earn the income, and the income buys manufactured items. This benefits us, and it benefits the rest of the world too. The only thing that matters is that we generate enough income to provide the manufactured items that we require, that the value of our exports is equal to the value of our imports.
Don't imagine that it's impossible to export services. When foreigners come to the UK on holiday, we're exporting services. When they use our banking and insurance services, we're exporting services. When we teach foreigners at a UK university, we are exporting services.
Britain is still one of the world's leading producers of manufactured items. Lots of people would like this sector protected to secure that position. Problem is, if we'd done that in recent years, we would have lost considerably because services have risen in price relative to manufactured items. So actually, our concentration on services has benefited us considerably. So does it really matter if our manufactured items are not produced in the UK?
Does the fact that we have quite a lot of unemployed people suggest that our manufacturing sector
should be bigger. We often have a balance of payments deficit. Does this suggest that we need to produce more of our own manufactured items? Does it matter that we're not self-sufficient in food? Should we continue to subsidise farmers? If we subsidise manufacturing industry, who gains and who loses? If manufacturing is to be protected, what's the best way for the government to do it? Some of the manufactured items that are produced in Britain come from foreign investment. What examples can you give? Does this help or harm the UK economy?